Hey everyone, Rebecca Jonesy here. It's your book dragon back today with something a little bit different. So normally I do reviews, but other times I like to do readings. And today's reading is going to be from one of the Three Furies Press books, one that I absolutely adore, because let's face it, I adore all of them, otherwise I wouldn't publish them, clearly. But today I am going to do a fairly long reading for you all, and it is going to be from Spade by S.L. Byrum, and I am going to read chapter 1 for you. So let's get to it. By the way, there are 3 separate scenes in here, so I'll let you guys know when we jump scenes. Chapter 1. It's not even 3 a.m., Harry Planchet said, looking over at his cell phone. The small pillow he used had found its way onto the floor, while his blanket had ended up mostly on his chest, leaving his legs bare. No one was around to hear his grumbling, but he stated the time as if the couch he slept on might argue back. He went to the kitchen to make a cup of chamomile tea, grabbing one mug only to put it back and examine another. Forget this, Henry said, closing the cabinet. He rubbed his face and shook the night's uneventful sleep off of him. He grabbed his pillow and blanket and walked up the stairs to put them back on his bed. Just looking at his bed was unbearable. He stepped lightly into the hall, looking at his daughter's door. Glad someone's sleeping. He went down the stairs a bit heavier-footed than anticipated and kept the same pace walking outside onto the front porch. The screen door slammed behind him, and he hoped to God it hadn't woken up Drea. It's bad enough that he was awake and couldn't sleep. It had almost become a normal routine in the Plachette house. He would wake at all hours and just be there, alone. It hadn't always been like this, though. There was once a beautiful, complete family that had lived in this very house. In fact, it was only 7 months ago he was speaking with his wife about mundane things, the checkbook and new B&B they wanted to create as a retirement plan for them and her parents, desserts to try. Things changed after Kathy died. His beautiful wife, Kathy. When she died, she took everything with her. Laughter, emotions, the meaning of home. It was all gone. The only thing left were the 2 broken people she loved, Andrea and himself. Henry breathed in deep and took in the early morning's air. He could smell a storm coming. He saw the lightning, but didn't hear any thunder yet. He glanced at the garden bed Kathy had planted. It could really use the rain. So much for Drea not waking up, Henry said. He leaned on the porch railing and just breathed. In, in, out. The pain from Kathy's passing had made these hours of being alone almost unbearable. Mr. Neil Jacob Crowder III, Henry's psychologist, made sure to remind him that breathing was the start to healing in life. Henry's psychologist was a practical man with a love for being outdoors, hunting, fishing, hiking, kayaking. You name it, and chances were Mr. Crowder enjoyed it, or it was on his list to try, and most likely take delight in. Run! A high-pitched shriek tore through the air. All the color drained from Henry's face as he shifted to high alert, bolted back inside, letting the screen door slam in his wake. He sprinted through the dining room and took the stairs 2 at a time, slammed open the door, and froze. Andrea's room was barely lit by a nightlight, and Henry could just make out her form. She tossed her head back and forth, and her body jerked in the throes of what he assumed was an intense dream. Her mouth wasn't really moving, but she was muttering something he couldn't quite make out. Henry sat down on the bed next to Drea and took her hand. It was clammy to the touch. He could see the sweat gliding off her forehead. Her breathing labored. Drea, Dad is here. It's okay, Henry said. He began to rub her hand and forearm to gently wake her. Come on, baby girl, wake up for me. He kept rubbing her palm. He didn't know if it was for him or her. They both were a hot mess that early in the morning. Drea opened her eyes, seeing Henry, but not fully understanding that she was safe. Her breathing was still deep and labored as she gulped in air to keep up with her fast heartbeat. Her body shook, and Henry saw a tear or two fall from her amber-colored eyes. He felt her hand tighten in his as she came to realize she was awake and no longer dreaming. Her breathing slowed. My Dad, Drea said. Another nightmare, Henry thought. Good morning, Drea. Henry patted her arm and smiled at her. There's going to be a nice big summer storm in the early morning, Henry said, trying to give her a different reason for her nightmare. But he knew the reason was more so for him. He knew the truth of her sleep troubles and why there was a struggle within. It was still too raw for him, but for a moment he could pretend that the darkness of the early morning storm was the reason, at least for a little while. Drea turned her head and looked out her bedroom window. Sounds like it's going to be a bad storm, I'm afraid, Henry observed as he got up from around Drea's bed. He could see the fear plain on her face. The storm brewing outside was a welcoming presence for him, a nerve-wracking one for Drea. Not this morning, though. Henry was determined to distract her from the storm. He thought the timing was as good as it was ever going to get for an introduction to Spade. With her dreams pulling her into that realm, he began to feel it was past due. He may not always know what to say to Drea since her mom had passed away, but he knew that now was the perfect time for one particular story. Next scene. That's such a protective, charming person, Drea thought. Her mom had said it on more than one occasion, but Drea just realized Mom had been right. His eyes showed their concern for her. The blue-gray eyes looked her face over, and she realized she must look a crazy mess. He kept running his hand through his dark chocolate hair. He kept it short, but it still had a slight wave. Must be a nervous habit. Drea knew ladies always smiled at him and would blush when he flashed a smile back. She remembered her mom, Kathy, commenting on the devilish cleft in his chin. He would smile at everyone, but he only had eyes for her mom. More storms, Drea said, throwing her blankets off of her. I'm tired, Dad. I hate it when the thunder makes so much noise. Does it have to be so ear-piercing? To make things worse, the electricity would probably go off and on throughout the early morning. That meant she would have to reset her alarm and no television. The cell phone she shared with her dad wouldn't have any reception either. Not that we'd need a storm to have those problems, though. Living in Mount Pleasant, North Carolina, was enough to cause reception problems. There were always random spots that did not get good reception in town. Thunder is hardly noise, Henry said. Could have fooled me, she retorted. Rain by itself was not a problem. It was the thunder. Thunder made the world stop and watch. Thunder demanded respect. Had its own way, and man had to endure until the thunder went quiet. That sound, my dear, is an ageless lullaby conducted by nature, he said, stretching his arms out as if to conduct the storm himself. His eyes closed as if to feel the full impact of the lullaby. Can you feel it gently rocking you? It's one of the most beautiful melodies man can hear. I hope she keeps playing. His smile was slow in coming, but it was hard to miss once it was there. Freya rolled her eyes as she got up in bed and walked over to where her dad was, her arms crossed over her chest. And she frowned. Yes, Dad, I feel it rocking me, the house, and the ground. Even if I put cotton in my ears, I would still feel the thunder. There's no escaping the sound. He put his arms around her, chuckling at her observation, and they stared out the window for a moment. Crack! The sound of thunder and the sight of lightning flashed in the distance. Drea snuggled close to her dad and watched. The window provided a spectacular view. Henry held Drea. The last time there was a storm like this, he had been holding both his ladies. Well, the noise hurts my ears, Drea said with slight trouble. She expected the sound, expected the volume to come and go throughout the night, as it often did during storms. She did not expect to have to fight off a panic attack. This was a simple rainstorm, not a hurricane or tsunami. She was frightened, but tried not to let it show. 12-year-olds aren't supposed to be afraid of things like storms anymore. She chastised herself. Julia took a deep and slow breath as her psychologist, Mrs. Tammy Crowder, had instructed. Something to calm her nerves. Do you know what I think? Henry asked. He could see the panic that rose in Julia's beautiful brown eyes. He watched her calm herself. She moved her fingers to her earlobe, pulling gently. It was a focus point her mom had taught her to help reduce fear and anxiety. That we will never get to bed until the storm is over, replied Drea with as much sarcasm as she could muster. She kept breathing deep, calming breaths. Looking at her dad, she noticed him raise one of his brows at her. She realized she was rubbing her earlobe and abruptly stopped, rolling her eyes at him with a tentative smile. Smirking, Henry said, "No, I mean, you're probably right. We may not sleep till the storm is over. But I was thinking I could tell you a story in the meantime." "A story? Dad, I would love to hear one," Drea said. Her arms unfolded and she sat straighter, leaning onto the arm of the chair. "I think," he continued, "we should make hot tea and sit on the porch to watch the rain while I tell you this tale." "The porch?" Drea repeated. She could feel a panic attack beginning to form all over again. Her eyes were going back and forth from the window to her dad. Surely her father would not put her in danger. "Yes, yes," repeated Henry thoughtfully. He began to pull at his chin. "We can bring blankets and cookies from the pantry to help us relax." Drea just took a moment to breathe deep and slow. This was as much for her dad as it was for her. The thought eased her mind and pushed the panic aside. "Don't forget flashlights," Drea said. She was a little surprised at her willingness to add to the madness. My tongue must be working separate from my brain, Drea thought. "A flashlight too," Henry said, nodding his head in agreement. As they turned from the window, a crack of thunder boomed across the sky. Drea jumped into her dad's arms, unable to contain her fear of the noise. He was safe. He was all she had left, and he could get her through this. He was her dad. The house must have moved that time for sure, she thought. The walls vibrated. "Don't worry, Drea," Henry said. "Everything will be just fine. We're not out in the field where we can be struck by lightning. We are safe. Even on the porch, we will be fine. Trust me." Henry reached over and hugged his daughter close. Drea tried to smile at her dad, but knew she looked pitiful. She didn't know who she was trying to convince that she was okay, but she knew her dad wasn't buying it. The only comfort she had was the story. Her curiosity was the only thing stopping her from going inside. Dad's story was a comforting thought. Maybe the story will help me feel better, she thought. Henry put the water on the burner to boil for tea, while Drea found the raspberry-filled cookies in the pantry. As she reached into the pantry, she was struck by a memory of her mother. "Just try them," her mom said. "No," Drea huffed. "I bet you'll like them," her mom said, holding a cookie out to her. "If I don't, you won't buy them anymore?" Drea asked. "Of course I'll buy them again, Andrea," her mom laughed. "I'll buy them for me. I won't make you try them again, though. Just this once." "Fine," Drea said, and prepared to take a bite. She looked at the powdered sugar sprinkled on top of the round thumbprint of the cookie. She decided to lick it. The raspberry jam stuck out of the center. Sugar in the jam, or as the powder, sugar in jam, or as powder, always tasted good. She dared not look at her mom. Drea began to nibble the outside shortbread. The butter was rich coming through the soft cookie. Then decided she took a bigger bite and got the jam this time. As she was about to hand the cookie back to her mom, she realized it did taste good. "I can take the cookie off your hands," her mom said, smiling. Kathy could see the wheels spinning in Drea's mind. Her little facial expressions changed multiple times, trying to hide the pleasure she took from eating 2 bites of this raspberry cookie. Kathy patiently watched as Drea decided for herself if she liked it or not. If she could see the results clearly in her face, Kathy wanted to hear it from her daughter. "This cookie is okay," Drea said. "I'll try another bite." She already wanted another cookie. "Sure," her mom smiled. "I would eat the whole cookie just to make sure I was making the best decision," her mom said, with a mock, knowing look. And that's just what Drea did. "I love it," Drea said, smiling around a mouthful of cookie morsel. She was so surprised, but her mom wasn't. "You thought you might," her mom laughed. It would have been a laughable moment that she and her mother could have reminisced about. Why am I remembering this now? It made her heart hurt to think of her. Kathy was all over this house. Her smell, touches of laughter, memories of her were embedded in everything. She remembered the first time her mom gave her those cookies. Drea was 5 then. Drea thought about her mom's smile as she held the bag of cookies. Mom had kind, light brown eyes with a dazzling golden flecks. She seemed to dance when she laughed, and she was always laughing about one thing or another. Her hair was a thick auburn, usually kept in a loose bun to tame it. But she let it down. When she let it down, the curls seemed to bounce in all directions, no matter how much conditioner or hairstyling product she would use. She still managed to break a few detangling combs. Her laughter was contagious as she would say, "Another comb bites the dust." These cookies are still my favorite. They were Mom's favorite too. She remembered how they would drink tea and eat a cookie or two while discussing what happened that day. She loved those memories. She hugged the cookies to her chest and to hold the moment to her. A tear crept to the corner of her left eye. The happy tear fell down her cheek. Tria let it. She watched it hit her box of cookies, and tipped the box to watch it roll off and onto the floor. "Did you get lost?" Henry called from the kitchen. Tria pulled herself from her thoughts. "Found 'em," Tria answered, wiping the new tear forming in her eye away. "I'll go get the blankets in the hope chest," she said. Tria absolutely loved their quilts. Her great-grandma Addie, short for Adeline, had made most, if not all, of the family blankets for marriages, for birth, and for any other special occasion. Each one was made with a different set of design patchwork. They were the best, in Dria's opinion. She held the blanket great-grandma Addie had made for her when she was born. It had strawberries and flowers all over it. "This blanket will give me comfort to face the storm tonight," she thought. Henry had collected the lime and sugar for the tea. He couldn't find the tray to put everything on, though. He searched the pantry and the cabinets above the fridge. He even looked in the china cabinet as if it would magically appear. Trying to remember where they last used it. Lived in this house for over a decade. You would think I could find a simple tray. "Kathy!" he hollered, as he did so many times when he couldn't find what he was looking for. He looked like a madman on the hunt. He moved things under the sink, by the stove, the island with all its spacious drawers, and finally the butler's pantry. Nothing. "The tray's on the side of the microwave, Dad," Drea said. Her brows pulled in, and she began to rub the middle of her forehead. She considered making a joke, but thought better of it. Without a word, he grabbed the tray and placed the lime and sugar for the tea onto it. He took his time organizing each item, collecting his thoughts before he dared to speak. "I think your mother likes to hide things from me." He laughed before realizing what he said, instantly sobering. He cast a pained look at the floor before throwing an uneasy hand through his wavy hair. "I bet it's been there since we moved into this house," he mumbled, to no one in particular. He managed to appear calmer, but Drea wasn't convinced. The teapot whistled. Henry pulled himself out of his thoughts and put the teapot on the tray and added the tea bags. He arranged for the pot to go directly in the middle to keep the tray balanced. Opening the drawer under the microwave, he grabbed his pouch with his pipe in it. "Mom would have used the rose teapot for serving," Drea said under her breath. That was Dad's way, though. He didn't see the point of extra steps. Why put boiling water from one teapot into another? It didn't make sense to him at all. To her mom, though, it was about presentation. There was an argument between them that always ended in laughter. Drea was glad that her father hadn't taken the rose teapot out. It was too painful to look at. Perhaps he felt the same way. "And we're ready to go outside," Dad said. He looked to Drea to follow him through the living room and opened the screen door to the porch. "You still want to do this outside?" she asked. She already knew what he would say. Reluctantly, she opened the screen door. "There's nothing to worry about, Drea. You and I will be safe." Once Henry got started on the story, he was confident he would have Drea's complete attention. "Right," Drea said, without conviction. She snagged a blanket off the couch. "I will explain why there is no reason to fear," he said with an authority that comforted her, putting her mind at ease. As they walked back to the porch, Drea's mind wandered to the dream she had just woken up from. It was odd from the beginning. "I've had this dream before. I'm sure of it," she thought. The same forest with red maple trees and Table Mountain pines, Fraser magnolia trees popping up here and there with full, showy white flowers. The fragrance wasn't as beautiful as the flower itself, Drea remembered. Some spooky, odd-shaped trees loomed over Drea. Her breath burst in and out. She began to walk, but her knees kept locking up. The deja vu of a dream started the same. It was dark out. She was standing out in the creepy forest. The pre-dawn brought the sounds of the crickets and owls with the winds that shook the leaves and the trees a little. There was a small house in the distance, made of stone. She could see it, but she could never find the will to approach it. There was a river somewhere in the forest. She could hear it, but she would break into a cold sweat at the mere thought of finding it. That was a new piece to the dream, Drea thought. I got up my nerve to go and find the river. Drea wasn't entirely sure why the river was so important to her, only that felt compelled to go. Slowly, Drea made her way through the path the forest had provided, as if the path wanted her to get to her destination without getting lost. It was clear and spacious. The moon seemed to help light her way, step by step. She inched her way toward the sound of the rushing water. Every hair on her small body had been standing up. Her eyes were watchful of every movement. Even the smallest sound made Drea more alert to her surroundings. She clasped her own hand and brought it to her chest, rubbing small circles with her thumb on the backside of a palm. Go back, she thought several times. Keep going, she thought just as often, torn between decisions. Her feet just followed the path and didn't bother to listen to her brain. The tree branches hovered in some areas, but not all of them. The earth below the trees seemed sturdy under her feet. The air smelled of pine, and this comforted her. She loved the smell of pine best of all the trees. Even winter holiday, she could remember every winter holiday she could remember with her mom brought back the rich smell of the pine tree. Drea had to stop a few times to spite herself. She would occasionally pause on the walk to try and hear the secrets the wind may offer. She wrinkled her nose a little as she gazed over the shrubs and smaller trees. As the sound of the river grew louder, so did the beating of Drea's heart. She couldn't tell which one was louder. An owl or two flew by with a frightful hoot, scooping up its prey before landing on a branch to devour it. It was fascinating, but Drea decided to walk faster. Even that didn't stop the feeling, as if someone was watching her. She looked to the right and left, expecting to see a wild animal. No other animals seemed to want to reveal themselves. She found her way to the river with ease. Many of the same trees and vegetation could be seen. Stones large and small decorated the river on both sides. Green moss covered a few. Roots from surrounding trees popped up near some of the larger stones and then disappeared beneath the water, stretching farther than Drea could see it. The rushing water sounded all wrong to her. It should have been a sight that comforted her, but it wasn't. Something felt out of place. Her eyes wandered along the river bank. The moonlight allowed her to see a good distance in both directions. There was nothing out of the ordinary. Her eyes scanned the other side of the river. Where is this forest? Am I still in the Carolinas? Out of the corner of her eye, she saw something move on the opposite bank. It was a kid. At least it looked like a kid from her side of the river. The idiot only looked halfway dressed and was partly in the water. He had his back to her and was motioning with his arms to get someone's attention. How did this kid get here? Hello, she shouted. Her voice was swallowed by the roar of the river. The kid continued to wave at someone. Rhea couldn't see anything. More kids? She thought. The trees covered anything she hoped to have a peek at. Maybe the kid's family is here, and I can speak with them. Someone must know where we are in this forest. She was going to get answers, so she stepped into the river. It was very shallow where she stood. Hello, she screamed again, this time at the top of her lungs, flailing her arm in a frantic wave. At that moment, the ground began to shake. There was a booming sound that made her think someone was blowing up rock not too far from where she stood. It shook and shook some more. Drea strained to see what was coming. Dumb trees, I can't see a thing. The sky turned dark and angry looking while the wind made the branches sway a little. She held her breath, waiting. I'm in California. It's an earthquake, she thought. And a series of loud thuds met her ears. Boom! 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 The roaring river seemed to let loose its roar over the sound that was making its way closer. Just breathe. Maybe Godzilla? What other animals live here that can make such an entrance? Stampede may cause such a sound, but the kid wouldn't wave at it to come closer. Maybe the mountain's coming down. Then she saw it. The creature's massive head came into full view. It had a head like a large beast, with the horns of a bull. It had the body of a man, only 10 times larger. His body was pure stone. It looked like it had been carved from a mountain. It was so huge she nearly fell over herself trying to get her feet to move in the opposite direction. The air rushed from her lungs like she'd been hit in the stomach. Nothing had prepared Drea for this. She wasn't sure what her eyes were seeing. That stupid kid was still standing there like a little idiot, waving this thing on. Run! She screamed to the kid who just stood there. She wasn't going to wait around to see if the kid heard her. She turned to run and woke up sweaty and hyperventilating. Her sheets wrapped around her stomach, evidence she had tossed and turned all night. I remember that part, Henry spoke out. He kept his thoughts to himself about his own sleepless night. What? Drea asked. Her eyes began to blink rapidly. She looked to her dad for guidance. I remember hearing you yell run. I ran right into your room to see what all the yelling was about. He said, oh, yeah, she said in a confused voice. Her body started to break into a cold sweat. Remembering the things in her dream gave her more to think about. It's happening again, isn't it? Henry said. He could see the raw emotion running across her facial expressions, her eyes unfocused and filled with uncertainty. What? She asked. She rubbed both her earlobes and turned her full attention on her dad. You've gone somewhere else, in your mind, haven't you? Henry said. He could see it. He didn't really need to ask. But she needed to know he saw her. She wasn't alone. Drea just looked at her dad and tried to remember when she'd begun talking to him and not thinking to herself. It had all begun to run together, dreams and reality. I feel like I'm losing control of my mind, Dad, Drea said, her voice so weak it was barely a whisper. She refused to be defeated. She desired to be strong like her dad. He just never seemed weak. You seem to be fighting for control, Henry said, then smiled and hugged her. He knew more than ever this was the perfect time to tell his story. Thank you for sharing your dream, he continued. Now I understand what's going on with you. The massive head you spoke of sounds like a minotaur, Henry said with a chuckle. His eyes were smiling at her. He had thought of a minotaur in years. There's a story for a different time. What's a minotaur? Drea asked, her nose scrunched up as she tested the word out. Henry choked on air, his laughter surprising him, nearly making him drop the teapot. It's a minotaur, Drea, not a minotaur. They don't even sound the same, he said, trying to keep his composure, but couldn't help chuckling. In an instant, Drea had an attitude. He had forgotten how sensitive she could be. It isn't funny, Dad, she huffed. It's too early for this. Drea tried to focus on the conversation, but couldn't keep her thoughts together. Sure it is. He flashed his famous grin, bringing attention to his devilish cleft. Drea rolled her eyes and watched the rain. The thunder didn't sound so frightening now that she was outside. It was loud, sure, but not scary. Drea was eager to hear the reason her dad had for not being scared. Due to getting lost in her own thoughts, she realized it wasn't going to happen that night, and she regretted it. Should we get on with your story, Dad, or will you laugh yourself into a coma? She spat. This did nothing to calm Henry down. Henry missed engaging in lively conversation with his daughter. On numerous days, they would have a small tiff over what to watch on TV, where to go to eat, and why the Duke and Tar Heels were always going to be rivals. Since Kathy had passed, he realized Drea had not been herself, and if he were honest, neither had he. Oh, sweetheart, I needed a good laugh. She could not remember the last time he laughed. Her dad had laughed. Since her mom had died, the house was short on humor. It made him seem years younger. Can you begin to can you begin the story now? Drea asked. She felt she had been patient enough. It seemed Henry was calming down. He was more serious now. Clearing his throat, he poured Drea and himself a cup of tea, trying desperately to give the impression of a serious father. A grin took up his face when Drea wasn't looking. They prepared their tea and each grabbed a raspberry cookie. He was trying to choose his words carefully to begin the story. He understood his daughter. She was like him in her way of imagination and dreaming. Distinguishing the difference between reality and imagination was what the essence of Henry's story was about. Henry was still searching his mind for the right words to begin. He kept thinking, is she too young? But didn't say it out loud. He was not her age when he had learned this story. The fights that had broken out between him and his granddad were what he had needed to find his way into that realm. The bottom line was, he knew she needed to know. The Consequences for Drea if she didn't accept the realm and deal with her own chaos would cause her to be stuck in a loop of absolute nothingness. No emotions, they would be cut off. No sense of danger or growth. She would be in her own cell of chaos. Henry couldn't let that happen. He knew the mantle had to be passed to the next generation at some point. He had hoped it would be later on in her life or would possibly skip her. No such luck. And that, my friends, is the end of chapter 1. You get introduced to Henry and his daughter Andrea, called Drea, and you learn about their mom, who a few months ago died, and the chaos and pain that they are currently living in as they try to figure out how to live life and just go about their normal day, missing 1/3 of their family, who connect with them and made life whole. And you also hear a little bit about Spade. So Henry knows Spade, and he is about to tell Drea who she is. And of course, at the ending there, you get a little teaser, a little hinty hint about what is happening to her and what the consequences could be if she does not learn how to deal with that. So if you want to learn more about that and learn more about Spade, because trust me, you do, Spade is a very interesting character, and I absolutely love that this is the first series about this character, then you should check out S.L. Byrum. Grab her book 1, Spade, and give it a read. I will obviously be putting the link for that below. You can click on that yourself. And until next time, everyone, I hope you read well and prosper, and I will talk to you then. Bye.